we've got James Heappey, who is the former Armed Forces Minister, joining us now. James, morning to you. Is it fair to say that you effectively quit as a minister and you're standing down at Parliament because you were pretty fed up that the Tory government wasn't spending more on defence?
No. I decided to stand down from Parliament because I didn't want to be an MP for the next 5 years. And having made that decision, I made a decision that I should probably also step back as a minister to give myself time to, A, have 6 more months being a backbench MP, but B, to start having a think about what I would do next. But having left government, I have used the freedom that you get once you're no longer bound by collective responsibility to make the case for more defence spending. And I'm delighted that the Prime Minister has answered the call as emphatically as he has yesterday.
Well, we talked to Kevin Jones, Labour, of course, no surprise. He said this is all spin and hot air because next year, in fact, James, you would know better than anybody, defence spending will actually fall next year.
Well, yeah, interesting.
But is he right?
What was announced yesterday is £75 billion more on top of what is already the largest amount of money the UK has ever spent on defence. And that will be transformative if we are getting to the point where that sort of announcement, the key principle of which is 2.5% of our GDP from the end of the decade will be spent on defence, and between now and then we will move incrementally towards that target. And the answer, instead of matching it, which would be what Putin would take notice of, what our allies would take notice of, and what would cue defence industry to start scaling up because they would have the confidence that irrespective of the general election result, there was consensus. Labour instead are trying to sort of squabble over a footnote in the budget. That doesn't seem to me that they understand the strategic importance of the moment.
How important is it that we have more funding to support the action in Ukraine, James?
Vital. And I think that it's really important that people see those two things as clearly connected because they both contribute profoundly to Euro-Atlantic security, but they are fundamentally different. So we must resource the Ukrainians in order to keep them in the fight because any outcome other than a Ukrainian victory would be grotesquely expensive for Europe over the next 30 or 40 years, either a stalemate or a Ukrainian defeat. But separately, and every bit as important, is our investment in our own armed forces and the deterrence that they provide to our adversaries by demonstrating to our adversaries that we have forces that are lethal and sustainable, and that we will stay in the fight for as long as it takes to beat anybody that's stupid enough to take us on.
Can I just ask you, what does a Ukrainian victory look like?
Well, I mean, I think that the line that we've used in government from the very beginning is terms set by President Zelensky. That effectively respects the sovereignty of Ukraine. And if he were to choose to make a compromise, then that's fine. But I think that what it definitely doesn't look like is Russia breaking through the current lines and taking more Ukrainian territory. I also don't think it looks like a stalemate on the current line. I think Ukraine has to recover some or even all of the lost territory. Zelensky himself has said that includes Crimea. And I think that the donor community has to be willing to stick with the Ukrainians until that sort of outcome is achieved, because if it weren't, you would end up with a line across Ukraine, eastern Ukraine, with the Russians on one side and a Ukraine with a NATO security guarantee on the other. That would mean NATO would be in Ukraine as part of that security guarantee. Or if Russia was to break through, you would end up with the Russians on the NATO border in Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Poland. Which again would mean a reinforced NATO presence on that border. In both scenarios, very similar to East-West Germany in the Cold War. So with all of the expense that would bring with it over the next 30 or 40 years. So it is definitely the case that it is cheaper to stay with the Ukrainians for as long as it takes and do what's needed to get them the win, because the other two outcomes over the course of a century will cost us far more and could be incredibly dangerous.
Just briefly, James, he talked, the Prime Minister, about putting us on a war footing.
Yeah.
Who are we going to war with? Who's he fear we might have to go to war with?
No, I think that misses the point, Andrew. So I think it pays in the current geostrategic environment to believe that a war is possible. And if you believe a war is possible, then the best way to maintain the peace is to prepare for war, because that brings with it a deterrent effect. And one of the key things that underpins our war fighting capability is our industrial capacity, our ability to sustain ourselves. That's the thing we've been looking at of the Russians over the last 6 months or a year. That's exactly what our adversaries would look at of us. And so that's what I think the Prime Minister was getting after yesterday, and rightly so.
OK, thank you, James.